Good morning. I'm Dr. Mark Payne, the editor and publisher of Science in Brief, and I want to talk to you just a little bit about COVID-19 today. And because the subject is a little bit different than our normal format, I want to just talk to you directly. And I'll just advise you right now, video is definitely not my strong point. So please be patient and gentle, and we'll get through this as soon as possible. So, as you know, every day we get bombarded with all the bad news about the war on COVID-19, and here's just a few headlines that I Googled just now for this article, and I'm sure you kind of get my drift here. Coronavirus updates. 7-day average case total in the U.S. sets record for 27th straight day. That's out of the Washington Post. Here's another one. New U.S. record of highest single-day coronavirus cases set in Florida. That one was off of CNN. Outlook worsens in much of the U.S. as July begins with a crush of cases. That one's from the New York Times. And finally, the new normal. How will things change in a post-pandemic world? That one's off of NPR. So, as you've already heard a million times, this COVID virus thing is awful. It's just awful. And it's terrible. I mean, it's really, really terrible. And the media hits us with it every single minute. And even if it's not exactly the end of the world, we are most certainly being told that the end of the world we've always known is here. And we better all just hunker down and get ready for the new normal. And I'm hoping maybe you can feel my sarcasm here just a little bit. But sarcasm aside, make no mistake, this stuff is bad. And I'm not trying to minimize COVID-19, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we take it lightly. But sometimes there's some genuinely good news out there that's just as important as all the scary headlines. So before you start digging a basement underneath your COVID-19 bunker, you do have a bunker, don't you? Here's some good news that probably won't make it to your evening news. There's a new study that's underway by Wake Forest Baptist Health in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They're a very large teaching and research hospital there in Winston-Salem. And the results are shining some interesting light on the COVID-19 pandemic. I just became aware of this study over the 4th of July weekend when I ran across a great article dated 7/2 of 2020 by Steve Harrison and Claire Donnelly. They're both reporters for WFAE 90.7 FM in Charlotte. I've borrowed heavily from their article, and I ask their forgiveness, but I really wanted to share this with all of our friends and colleagues as soon as possible. I encourage everyone to link to and read their original work, and I have provided the link in my editorial on Science in Brief, and that's at the Matlin website, matlinmfg.com. First, some background. In early April, the hospital received $100,000 in funding from the North Carolina State Assembly to study both symptoms and blood findings in former patients of the Wake Forest Baptist Health System. And they just did this with volunteers that were willing to participate in the project. The study is known as the COVID-19 Community Research Partnership. And as of June 30th, the study had enrolled 18,456 participants, and they have a stated goal of surveying over 500,000 volunteers. The state's interest in this project was to gather information relative to the management of the pandemic in North Carolina, and that included strategies for trying to reopen their economy. The study did not seek to determine which patients might currently have the virus, but instead they used a simple home blood test, just a finger prick, to determine which patients have already been exposed to the virus and are now producing antibodies. Additionally, the study used a questionnaire to determine the nature and severity of any symptoms the participants might have experienced. So when the study began in April, only around 1% of participants had been exposed to the virus. But by mid-May, the picture was changing rapidly, with about 5% of participants having been infected and now producing antibodies. By June 21st, over 14% of the participants were testing positive for the antibodies, which was essentially a tripling of the number of those who had been exposed as to what they were seeing in the early part of the study. And now these people are all expressing an immunity. So that percentage is expected to continue to increase exponentially as more and more of the general public is exposed to the virus. Now, if you just listen to the media, you think that more and more cases is automatically bad. But please note that this rapid increase in exposure does not appear to be a bad thing, as you'll see here in just a moment. Harrison and Donnelly interviewed John Sanders, the chief of infectious disease at Wake Forest Baptist. He explained that this is sort of a double-edged sword in that while there's definitely a rapid increase in the number of people demonstrating antibody evidence, meaning they've been infected or have come in contact with the virus, this was his quote, "The vast majority of these people have very few or no symptoms." In the interview, Sanders was quoted on 3 key points to keep in mind. 1, the death rate is, quote, lower than we have estimated. 2, quote, the severity of symptoms is lower than we estimated. And 3, and this is a quote also, the vast majority of people who were infected are going to do fine. Finally, Sanders noted the robust nature of the data they've been gathering so far, stating that this data set is as large and significant as any other data set that has been released from any other system in the world. This is a big study, folks, and it's getting bigger by the day. And even though this isn't technically the type of peer-reviewed study we normally cover in Science in Brief, it's really much too big to ignore. Plus, I just happen to think it's something that people need to hear right now. So here's what I think this all means. As of this writing, here are the official numbers from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. The state has officially recorded a total of only 74,529 confirmed cases, out of a total of 1,051,846 people who actually completed a test. That works out to an infection rate of about 7.08% among those who've actually been tested and have shown to be positive for the virus itself. Of those 74,529 cases, there have been 1,398 COVID-related deaths recorded. That gives us a death rate of about 1.87%. Now, first off, 1.87% is a far cry from the doomsday numbers of 8 to 10% fatalities that we were hearing in the early days of the pandemic. That's pretty good news. But it actually gets even a whole lot better because these official numbers are almost certainly not telling us the whole story. Wikipedia says there were 10,488,000 people in North Carolina as of 2019. And I'll tell you, I have no reason to not believe them. If the Wake Forest Baptist data turns out to be representative of the state as a whole, and we don't know that yet, that would mean that roughly 14% of North Carolinians have already encountered the virus and are now showing immunity. That works out to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,470,000 people who may have already had this virus, recovered fully, and are now demonstrating antibodies. Compare that to the really small official figure of only 74,529 positive tests. My take on this is that the virus is far more widespread than previously thought, and contrary to the knee-jerk logic of the media, this is actually a good thing. Yes, people are getting exposed in large numbers, but they are also recovering quickly and developing natural immunity. Now, to be clear, this last little bit here is just my back of the envelope calculations. It's not part of the Wake Forest Baptist study. And while we don't know yet exactly how these numbers will work out over the whole state, we do know that the vast majority of these patients had not experienced severe symptoms or illness. And the very best news of all, this data is starting to kick those early doomsday death rate predictions, many of which are still scaring the soup out of us, right to the curb. Since we know the number of COVID-related deaths, 1,398 deaths with a pretty high degree of certainty because we could count the bodies. When we divide those 1,398 deaths by the projected number of people who may have already encountered the virus and are now showing immunity, 1,470,000, the death rate plummets down to just 0.09%, less than 0.1%. If these numbers hold anywhere close to true, that could put the actual lethality rate for COVID-19 very close to that of the seasonal flu, which, by the way, seasonal flu has been widely reported to be just 0.10%. So those two numbers are really, really close. So here's my take on this. In spite of the rising numbers of cases right now, things are actually getting better. Well, we certainly aren't out of the woods yet, and as always, more research is needed, but hopefully if you took the time to stick with me this far, you may find this to be a little bit encouraging in a time when the media seems hell-bent on putting the worst possible face on everything. We certainly still have a lot to learn about this pandemic, but personally, I'm remaining optimistic. I hope you will be as well, and I'm encouraging everyone to stay safe out there. I'm Dr. Mark Payne, and this is Science in Brief.